Okay, so hello everybody. I wanted to thank everybody for coming out today. I know with the weather yesterday it was kind of hectic to get everybody here. Today I'm going to talk to you about how not to let your backups be the backdoor to your IT security policy. And you may see that I'm not these two people right here. They weren't able to make it, but I'm here. So my name's Kirsten Stoner. I'm a Veeam certified engineer, and I'm also an awesome human. I'm on the product strategy team at Veeam. So being on the product strategy team, I get to do a lot of different things every day. I work a lot online, just helping users troubleshoot and also promoting Veeam. And then I also work with the Veeam Vanguard program, which is really just the Veeam's influencer program. And what's really cool about that is you get to meet all of these people around the world who love Veeam and love to talk about Veeam. And you get to know them and learn how Veeam actually helps their business every day. So a little bit more about my IT journey. I first started in IT back in college. I worked at the college library there. I really worked at the help desk, troubleshooting Microsoft Office, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. I also worked a lot with laptops, printers, and desktops, just helping troubleshoot students that came in and were having issues as well. So that's kind of how I started in IT, and now I'm working at Veeam on the strategy team. So why weren't Melissa and Rick able to make it today? And the real reason is because of the snow. And this also puts into perspective, because I work for Veeam as a backup company. Backups are critical, whether it be backups of data, backups of people, backups of things. And it's really important to always have a backup. And I almost think, as when I started at Veeam, I never really thought about backups. And now I always am thinking about a backup. You know, when I get on a plane, you know I have 2 pairs of headphones in my book bag, because if I lose a pair of headphones, what am I going to do? I'm going to be stuck. I'm going to have to buy some more headphones. So it's really important to just have backups in place and to think about your backups. And before you go someplace, think about what you have as a backup. So let's get started in our story here. So we're talking about security, so you might be thinking, why would Veeam care about security? Are any of you guys familiar of the CIA Triad? No one's familiar?
No.
Does anybody know what CIA means? Okay, Central Intelligence Agency. So the CIA Triad is really a benchmark the CIA has created for IT security for organizations today. And there's 3 pillars. Let's see if I can get this to. So there's 3 pillars of the Triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality being that users who are not authorized to have access to your data don't have access to it. Integrity being when your data is at rest, it's not being changed or manipulated. And availability being making sure your data is available to you when you need it. And that's really where backups come into play, because Veeam provides availability through the backup and replication of data. So a lot of the times companies have the confidentiality and the integrity part down really well. They may not have an availability strategy. And that's why it really matters to think about all 3 of these when you're thinking of a security policy for your organization. So now that we know why Veeam cares about security and why backups are important to security, let's just take a minute and have a reality check. A lot of organizations, they want all of these things. They want high performance, high security, ease of use. And all these things don't always play well together. They don't always go hand in hand. And with high security, you might have a really data center that has a lot of security in it, but it might become more complex, which would cause ease of use to go down. Or if you want to use encryption, maybe you would have higher CPU levels of performance in your data center. So it's really important to think about all these things. And when you're shopping for your data center, it's almost similar to shopping for a car. And if you can see here I have a car sticker, and you can also see that it's an electric car sticker. And that's because when you're thinking about your data center today, you really want to take a modern approach to it. When you're looking for a car, you want something that's fuel efficient, has maybe you want the car that has the video, the camera in the back, so that when you back up, you can see what you're backing up into. Maybe you want something that's affordable, that you can afford. But with all these different aspects, you might not be able to tie them all together, because if you get the high-tech car with the Bluetooth and the video, it's going to become more complex. If you maybe get a fuel-efficient car, it might be more expensive. So it's really important to consider all the factors, and when you go shopping, figure out what's best for your data center. And if you have to make compromises, make those compromises and figure out what works. Another thing to add here is just our data protection needs clear. And obviously, and sometimes, obviously, this might not be really known in your organization if your needs are really clear to you. So yes and no there. So you're really looking for the perfect storm of conditions. You want high performance, you want high ease of use, you want high availability and high security controls. But in many cases, organizations may not know exactly what they need. And it's also really important to note that you can get all these things, but there's always a cost associated with each of these conditions. So data protection and security. So back in the old days, the biggest risk that you might have had when it comes to data protection and storing your data is maybe you put your data on tape, and as you put it on the truck to go away, maybe a tape fell off the back of the truck. And that is definitely an old way of thinking, and it was a risk back then, but it could still be a risk today. But with modern IT and the realities of IT changing today, people are looking for they're more committed to storing their data on a disk-based system or even in the cloud. And when you think about the 3-2-1 rule, is everybody familiar with the 3-2-1 rule in here? Okay, so we have one person. So the 3-2-1 rule is really just this rule about data availability, that you want 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of media, one of which is offsite. So a lot of times when you're thinking about how am I going to get this data offsite, you might think, okay, we have an offsite data center, or we want to store it up in the cloud. So the realities of today is you need to know that when we're requiring data to be made and copied 3 times, you need to really think about where your data is at, who has access to it. Is it in the cloud? Is it on a storage system? And really just kind of consider those things when you think about data protection and security. So production and security practice. So security people in organizations, they're very good at protecting the live data. And there's a question here on the screen, and it says, does every organization have the same security controls for production applications and data in place for backup systems? And that's basically asking you as an audience, does your security people only have processes in place for that live data? Do they also have a process in place for the backup data as well? And so if you look at this picture here, there's a lot of different people walking, and you can almost consider these people in this picture data, whether it be data in the cloud or data somewhere else. They're live, they're moving, it's the live data. And security people probably have really good control over that data. They know what's happening, they want to know everything. They have really they have a lot of control, access control to that data. But what they might be actually overlooking is the shadows of these people. This could be basically data too. And especially when you think about the 3-2-1 rule, having those 3 copies of data, you're almost leaving a data trail of in the environment. You're leaving a data trail. And so just something to consider as well with IT today when you have these needs and recommendations to use. So what does this look like to you? Anybody have any guesses?
Like a color test, like a color blindness test.
Oh,
it's like a stop test.
Oh, it's like a color blindness test.
Yeah, they tell you that, can you see these numbers based off the different shapes? Probably a stoplight.
So me and my colleagues who were actually able to make it today, there was almost this joke that it was like the flag of Mali, and everybody thought it was funny, but I just didn't really get it. But it is the flag of Mali, which is a country someplace. I'm not really quite sure exactly where it is. But IT administrators and operations managers, these are what they look for in their data center. They look for green, what's going good. They look for yellow, maybe there's a warning. What do I need to fix before something fails, which would be the red. If the red happens, that means you need to fix something, you need to correct something, you need to make it go back to green. And a lot of the times when you're looking at only the yellow and the red, you're overlooking what's happening in the green. Just because something is showing up as it working properly, or say you're taking a backup and you're looking and you see, oh, that's green, that worked, doesn't mean that there's nothing under the hood that you need to be concerned about, especially when it comes to security. Now, security people look at all three of these colors and they know exactly what's going on in their organization. And I mean, security people, I feel like, want to know what's going on all the time. So they're looking at this screen, they're seeing what's happening under the hood, making sure that backups aren't actually being backed up someplace they're not supposed to be, or restores aren't being restored someplace else. So when you think about security, and if you're an IT administrator or an operations manager, you're thinking about all three of these things. It's a mindset that you have to have in today's IT world, especially with all the advanced technology that we have today. So let's get into some specifics here. Restore activity. So does anyone know what a redirected restore is? Does anybody typically work with backups or restores or data availability? Okay. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about a redirected restore. So say you are an IT manager and you have two people on your team. Let's say one name is Melissa and the other one is Rick. And Rick is in charge of the business processes, the business apps, making sure those are available for users every day. And let's say Melissa is in charge of the file systems, the email servers, the file servers. And so one day, Rick decides to go rogue and restore the CEO's mailbox onto his desktop. Now that is actually a really big security breach because it's a data integrity issue. That's a violation. You don't want somebody redirecting a restore to their own personal computer or anything like that, because then they're going to have access to all that data. They can go in there and read all that data. Maybe there's some insider data in there, and maybe they're thinking, oh, maybe I can make a few extra bucks and sell this data to people online and do some insider trading or something like that. So that's really the definition of a redirected restore, and that also comes back to that flag I showed you, the green, yellow, and red. Because when you look at the logs, yeah, you might say, okay, well, that restore was successful. But really, that restore shouldn't have even happened because it wasn't necessary. So you really have to dig a little deeper and not just look at the colors or the successes, but also look at what's happening. So another example of this is, say you have a database system or working in your production live environment, you're using a database, and the security team, since it's a live environment, they probably have a lot of security controls and protection on that live data. So what if, I don't know, Rick also went rogue one day and decided to restore the database to a development system? Now that is also a data integrity issue because that development system might not have the same security controls on it that the live production system has. So you can really run into some violations there and put your data in danger and threatened for security. And where it says even if incomplete, that also comes into the fact that data protection technologies today, a lot of the time when you take a backup, when you log into your data protection screen, you see the screen come up, and with this data protection and the advancements there, you can actually access the data and read the data without even having to restore the data. So that is kind of where the incomplete comes in, because you don't necessarily have to restore if you have access to the data and can read the data. But don't worry, because Veeam actually has a tool that you can use. For your data center. Veeam Backup and Replication does backup and replication of data, virtual and physical machines. And we also have this tool that is called Veeam One, which is a monitoring and reporting tool. So one of the really cool reports in Veeam 1 is this restore operator activity report. So as you can see here, there's a little description. It's basically a report that provides audit information for all the types of restores performed by the data protection server. So if we scroll down, you can actually see here that, what restores are being made by the users. Are these people supposed to be doing restores? Something you could ask yourself. Also, what type of restores are they doing? You can see, are they doing application item restores, full VM restores, guest files, restores from tape, and then you can also see when those restores are occurring and how many restores actually have happened. And something that's kind of cool too is, how I said earlier that the incomplete part, if you have access to these data protection systems, you basically have access to the data that you can read off of and read and get. This report, you can also see who's restoring the data, what they're accessing. So as I keep scrolling here, so you can see that Rick logged in, and this is the restore point that he accessed, the SQL database. But did he restore anything? No, he didn't. So what was he doing there? Was he supposed to be there? And then you can also see, too, here he accessed the SQL database again, and this is what he restored. So it's just kind of interesting because it allows you to audit your own people and your own information and know who's accessing what and when, and are they supposed to be accessing it? Because even if you scroll down even more here, this guy, Christian, is he supposed to be accessing? What is he doing in the SQL database? He's not supposed to be in there. So what? And he didn't even do restore anything. So it's like, why were you in there? What was going on? So it's just another layer of security that you have in your environment to just audit it and make sure that no one's doing any shady stuff. I know that we all want to trust everybody and we want to trust our employees, but can you really trust anybody? You never know. So that's just a really cool report that's included in Veeam 1 that helps monitor your backup infrastructure, your virtual infrastructure, and even your physical machines as well. So you want to look beyond the backup. Logging, computer logging for backup systems, and even storage systems with all the different storages we might have in our environment is very important to be able to look at it, know where it's at, read and understand it. And there was a story because the report that I just showed you, the Restore Operator Activity Report, was actually brought about and implemented is because one of the tools that we have in Veeam was too powerful. It was allowing users to be able to go in and look at the data. And in Europe, a lot of times they're very strict and they have very special requirements, especially when it comes to emails and who has access to them. Even if it's your business email, it goes both ways with personal and business. So it could actually be a really big security breach if one of your employees on your backup team was going into, say, example like Veeam Explorer for Exchange and opening it up and just looking at the data that was presented there. So that was one of the reasons why Veeam implemented the Restore Operator Activity Report, is just to make sure that you can look at that and you can know what's happening in your environment. It's also important to note that everything from VMs to storage snapshots can really be accessible by and be a security threat by outsiders. So it's important to know what tools you have, what technology you're using, and really understand them. Because as modern IT grows today and tools add more capabilities, you need to understand the tools that are used, and you also need to know what they're capable of and how they even work. So I mentioned earlier the 3-2-1 rule. And so that's really really the standard for data availability today. And you might see this square up here, and this kind of goes back to the people walking around and the shadows that they were leaving, the data trails that they were leaving with the data. And so a lot of people might look at that square and see, I don't know, 13 boxes. I personally see probably like 4 boxes there. So it almost is like kind of a trick because you need to know how much data you actually have, but it can be deceiving, especially if you have to continuously follow the 3-2-1 rule. And we've kind of set a new standard with the 3-2-1 rule lately, and you almost want to call it the zip code of availability, because now it's the 3-2-1-1-0 rule. And you might be like, well, where is this 1-1-0 rule coming into play? So this is what I mentioned earlier, the 3 different copies of data on 2 different media, one of which is off-site, one of which is offline, and 0 errors after backup and recoverability verification. And these 2 are really important because you should always have a copy of your data offline, especially today with all the ransomware and the attacks you hear of in the news. You never ever hear a CIO or anybody after they've been hit from ransomware talk about, oh, I wish that we didn't have that backup offline. No, they're always thankful that their backups are there and available, and if it's offline, it's not touchable by the ransomware threat that has happened to their whole environment. And then 2, you want to make sure that if you do have that data offline, you want to make sure that it's recoverable. What if you have a ransomware threat and you're like, oh, thank gosh, I have my offline data, I'm going to restore from that. But then you go to restore and you can't because there's errors in recovery. So it's also really important to make sure that when you do have that backup of your data, that you can recover it when you need to. So talking of offline and offline storage, there's a lot of different offline storages or semi-offline storage available today. So you could say that tape and rotating hard drives are completely offline. They're only online when they're being read or write to. And then the 3 here in the middle, you can consider almost semi-offline. Because replicated VMs, for example, is definitely a full copy of your data, but it can be powered off. Primary storage snapshots are great to have, but they're not directly mounted to the host. And cloud backups, yeah, I guess you consider that live data in the cloud, but it's not directly connected to your backup infrastructure. So those are some alternatives you can use to have your backup offline, especially if you don't want to use tape and you don't want to use rotating hard drives. So one thing not to do with your backups is definitely store backups in the wrong place. And I'm really glad that Rick and Melissa included this slide in this PowerPoint because I work a lot online in forums like Spiceworks, looking through Reddit, and I always seem to find people who don't have enough money to store their data offsite to the cloud or offsite to another data center. So that somehow they think it's a good idea to put their backups onto tape and then take those tapes home to their house and store their backups there, which is definitely not a good idea. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? What if that employee leaves? Are you going to get that data back? I don't know. Do you trust that employee? What if I always think of, too, like my dad growing up used to have fantasy football drafts in the basement. So if you have your data stored at your house in the basement, what if someone, I don't know, plays around with like the dark net or something crazy like that? And they're like, oh, what's this? I'm going to take the tape. So you don't really want to do that. So an alternative to this would maybe be starting to think about using a storage unit. And if you think about a storage unit, especially if it's inside, it might fit all the requirements that you need. Climate controlled, logged access, it's indoor. And you can even think about too, and they're pretty cheap, but if you want to get really crafty with it and make it a fun thing to have a storage unit and store your data there, you'd always pick a storage unit that's next to your favorite lunch place. So every Friday, you take your tape over, drop it off in the storage unit, and then maybe you grab lunch and then, just ease your way back into the Friday day. So it's a really good alternative to think about, especially if you don't have that extra budget or cash to store your data offsite into the cloud or to an offsite data center. Okay, so 2 things not to do. And a common practice today is to use a service account for backups, which is all fine and dandy, but in reality, service accounts normally are made and then stick around in data centers for a long time. And there's a story that I heard about our support team, Veeam support, customers calling in. And one of the things the support team does is when customers do call in, they take a look at the logs. And sometimes they'll come across the log in the service account with the name is of an old backup vendor. So it's like they're using the same service account for the old backup vendor, but they're using it for Veeam now. And what the thought is that it already has all the required permissions. It already has, all the access that you need. So let's use the service account and keep it around. Which this could actually be really bad too, because if a service account has access to all your data, what if you had a ransomware attack and they hacked that service account? It basically would have access to your storage, all your backup data, and everything, and really wipe you out clean. So it's really important to keep up with the times, and when you get a new, say you get a new backup vendor, change that service account. When you get a new storage device, change that service account. It's something that is often overlooked, and I don't think people actually think about, but it's so simple, and it takes like just a little bit more time in your day to create these different service accounts and also keep them separate from each other. Don't have the same service account be able to access your backup storage and your production environment. Keep them a little bit separate, and make sure you don't over-permission them. So this leads me to my free tip is to use special credentials for backup storage and backup jobs. Keep them separate. You don't want them to be over access and be able to watch everything. So just a couple other things to watch is when you're using VMware and Hyper-V, you really need to understand what securities are included in both of these technologies. VMFS is basically where virtual machines live. There's no out of vCenter security there. So you need to remember that and know that if you take your virtual machines out of vCenter, that there's not going to be that added security there in your environment. With other, vSphere is a huge application, has a lot of capabilities. A lot of people in your organization might have access to that. So you need to also make sure that the people who have access to that aren't over-provisioned as well, that they have some permissions put in place so they don't have access to everything in your environment. And then also, think about NFS primary storage. The security there could be really interesting as well. So, and then the same goes with Hyper-V. You have all these different technologies that are included in Hyper-V. It's really important to know your technology and understand what security is already built in and what security that you need to add into it. So just a mishap to avoid is that these out-of-band backups, and that kind of leads back to, VMware and things like that, and the technologies there is that when you have a lot of people accessing VMware using it, you need to make sure that they're not doing something and going out of band, because what if they have access to some of the data and then they're like, well, I'm going to download this backup product and take a backup of it and put it on a USB for just personal use. That's another violation of the CIA Triad. There's definitely things that you need to think about and make sure that you have the permissions in place to keep your data systems secure. And then also consider encrypted VMs. And this is something that is newer in vSphere. And it's really a use case for encrypted VMs is definitely when it comes to the Active Directory access and the Active Directory domain controller. So that leads me to the last tip, and that's use vSphere encrypted VMs for Active Directory domain controller VMs. And so I do have Rick and Melissa here on the WebEx, and I did say that I would ask them if they wanted to add anything. So if they can hear me, and you guys want to add anything, feel free. Sorry I went through that really fast. Okay, well, that's the presentation today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. You can also follow Veeam on Twitter. That's our hashtag, our Twitter name. And you can also tweet at Veeam any questions you might have as well. So does anybody have any questions?
So Veeam is specifically backup technology
Yeah, we do a backup and replication of data.
within appliance?
No, not necessarily.
You do monitoring as well, right?
Yes, we do monitoring through Veeam One. And then we are always, trying to stay up with the times and really listen to what customers need and want. So we also are continually adding more products to our product suite. We have the agents for physical Microsoft Windows machines and Linux machines. And then we also just announced Veeam Availability Orchestrator, which will really help orchestrate the failovers.
For ER?
Yeah. Okay, well, that's it for me.
Thank you.